No one knows everything, but everyone knows something no one else knows, including you. Welcome to the other side of things. I'm your host, Dr. Michael DiMaria, and for 35 years, I've been a guide of the soul. On the other side of things, we explore alternative perspectives on challenging topics, ranging from love, sex, death, and madness to dream work, breath work, and other cutting-edge healing modalities. We live on a precipice as a species, so let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Things. I've been looking forward to Sean being on this podcast for a very long time. Before I even started this podcast, I came across his work many, many years ago, over a decade ago, and I've watched it develop, and it's really exciting that he's on the show because he's just finished his newest book, which I just finished, and I'm thrilled he made time in his busy schedule to be with us. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Since 2007, Sean Blackwell has been researching and teaching about the spiritual dimension and healing potential of bipolar disorder through his YouTube channel, Bipolar or Waking Up. His videos graphically illustrate subjects such as spiritual emergency, transpersonal psychology, and the evolution of consciousness, always demonstrating how these themes relate to transcending the bipolar condition. His book, Am I Bipolar Waking Up, published in 2011, describes his own bipolar awakening, subsequent hospitalization, and complete recovery. You heard that right, complete recovery, which happened in 1996. In 2013, Sean started Bipolar Awakening's Healing Retreat, a pioneering program for people who wanted to heal from their so-called incurable condition. In September of 2016, Sean received a certification as a holotropic breathwork facilitator with the Grof Transpersonal Training, the official training program of Dr. Stanislav Grof. This education has been fundamental to the development of the healing retreat process as a modified form of the holotropic breathwork, bipolar breathwork, provides the basis for the bioenergetic healing process which takes place during retreats. Based upon his experience facilitating private retreats, Sean developed two new online healing modalities. In 2020, he launched distance surrogate breathwork and conscious emotional clearing as two very affordable options that could help people begin to heal their bipolar condition safely within the comfort of their own home. So without further ado, Sean, thank you for making time for being here. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm excited to be here. It's my first podcast in quite a while, and it's the first one on the new book. So I'm excited to get into it with you.
Wow, wonderful. And we've shared before, and just, this theme of the other side of things is really taking a unique look, really looking at the other side of things. The other thing I like to mention when I say the other side of things, I also like my parents passed, or some of my mentors and teachers, I'll say they're now on the other side of things. And so for me, the other side of things also is the other side of what we think of as the material world too. So we're not just looking at different perspectives, but your concepts of the healing field, which we'll get into, and others, is just perfect for this. And
Mm-hmm.
and I've shared with you, my grandmother spent her life, diagnosed schizophrenic in a state hospital in Pennsylvania, and I myself have what I have begun to refer to as soulcosis. And when I was 18, and between Carl Jung's work and Stan's work,
Mm-hmm.
who I don't know if you remember, I mentioned, he actually rebirthed me in New Orleans.
Oh, did he?
Yes, and it was at TAV. Sparks was there, who you
Okay.
talk about in the book,
Director of
and
GTT. Yeah.
yes,
The
God
late
bless
Tab
him.
Sparks.
Yes, the late Tav Sparks, and
Mm-hmm.
hearing in your books the personal story and connection to their work was so moving, and it was a life-changing experience. Having my experience was like kind of over the top, and so literally they called Stan over to be there as my
Mm-hmm.
sitter, and
Okay.
had a really powerful experience. So there were so many continuities and connections between your work and my journey. And I just love for those who don't know your work, and in particular this most recent book, to tell our audience a little bit about what led you to write it now, and a little bit about your work in general.
Okay, well, there's a very long story behind all of this, and sometimes people need to hear a little bit. But I was in the psychiatric hospital for 4 days in 1996, but it was a very spiritual experience for me. Um, I had had a scuba diving accident a few months before, an intensive self-help seminar. And then during the self-help seminar, I did this meditation that changed all my senses and made me feel more connected with things. It was a very powerful experience. But after about 5 days in this kind of sort of more open world where I was having all kinds of synchronicities and energetic sensations, I believed that I had died. And once you believe you're dead, ending up in the psychiatric hospital isn't too far away.
Mm.
I had taken all my clothes off in a hotel ballroom where the course I was taking took place, and the police came. I refused to put my clothes back on, and so they shipped me off. And I thought I was going to heaven, you know.
Mm.
So I like to bring this up because sometimes when people get into a spiritual podcast or something, they tend to think that, well, a spiritual experience is one thing and a mental disorder is something completely different,
Yes.
you know. But in this case, I was in the hospital. Sure, I had had a spiritual breakthrough of some kind, and when I got out, I I found the work of Stan Grof a year later, and my life got a whole lot better. My salary tripled over the next 3 years. I worked in advertising, and just everything just got a whole lot lighter. It ended 7 years of on again, off again depression, even though I had all of the criteria that a psychiatrist would see as having an acute psychosis. And they said that I potentially could have bipolar or schizophrenia. That was a possibility, you know. But I never went back to the hospital. I never got medicated again. And I eventually met my wife in Peru. It was like a calling to go to Peru, and met her there, and she was from Brazil. And I thought, well, this is an interesting place to live, and I felt like I needed that. And I went to Brazil, and we had very nice, especially in the beginning, it was a very nice experience. And then everything seemed great, and but something was missing. And next thing you know, she had two nieces went into acute psychosis in the same summer,
Mm.
and in the first one, her experience was very close to mine. And so I started going back to studying my work, but the books on Stan Grof about spiritual emergency, trying to figure out what was the difference between spiritual emergency and bipolar disorder. Um, and then I got into some other psychologists who were even more pioneering, who were dealing with anybody in first break psychosis without medications. Guys like Dr. John Weir Perry, who studied under Carl Jung, and Dr. Loren Moser. So they
Yes.
had a more radical approach than Grof, and all of that prepared me for when my wife's next niece, she went into a process and she contacted us directly, and
Mm.
we supported her through her psychosis without medication, and she was able to return to university. We supported her through two of three episodes in one summer, and she was able to return to university unmedicated, graduated with honors, came out and got a job where she was traveling to 11 countries.
Mm.
So we just had this overwhelming success, and that spurred me to start to make videos on YouTube under this channel, Am I Bipolar Waking Up? And then the first book, which was my story, Am I Bipolar Waking Up? So that's sort of the my story part. And then that whole thing was about setting up, like, how am I going to help people? And the videos were helping a lot of people, but it wasn't enough for a lot. And so eventually, it took like 6 years to really come to a place where I could construct a very helpful private healing retreat for people. For people. So I started working with people voluntarily while they were in psychosis, following the work of Loren Moser and John Weir Perry in 2007. But then to create a structured format where I didn't have to drop everything and risk being arrested, I needed 6 more years to figure that out. And that's when those retreats started in 2013. And so now I've done over 50, well, 60 or 70 retreats now with about
Wow.
60 people. And The book is about this new book, Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, is really, it's not my journey and my story of healing. It's the story of how I developed the work and the clients we helped along the way, and the theoretical ideas that came out of my process and led me to a more comprehensive, all-encompassing way of treating people, or I don't want to say treating, but helping people heal.
Mm.
You know, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's so moving to me because I think I share with you, I went to Duquesne University, which is kind of the place of phenomenological psychology. Jungian psychology is very unique in the States. It's more like a
Mm,
European university, and
mm.
we had every visiting folks from Frankel to Rogers to we even had one of my cohorts in my class was actually at Kingston Hall with Artie Lang, and that his, and
Kingsley,
then Kingsley
Kingsley,
Hall, right?
Kingsley,
Kingsley Hall,
right?
right? Similar
Yeah,
to Sotera, and of course,
right.
and I just, there's so little that has been explored in this country outside of Perry and Moser, and just extraordinary work they were doing. But then it just got so just was not talked about. And of course, Stan and his first wife Christina, when they started the Spiritual Emergency Network, was on my radar very early on. And it's been but even within when I was doing papers and speaking at the APA and doing work even in the area of transpersonal psychology and humanistic psychology, when I would talk about this that you're talking about, that psychosis
Mm-hmm.
and spirituality, and there was some kind of connection, I'd always get, even with so many of my most trusted friends, like, no, we're talking about two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Mm-hmm.
discussing early on with Stan and Tab, there was such a taboo of doing breath work with anybody with
Right.
bipolar,
It's
schizophrenia.
contraindicated until today.
Exactly. And you've helped pioneer that. So I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you could kind of, this idea of psychosis, spiritual awakening, not being more on a spectrum. I've actually started to play with this idea of what I'm calling the schizo-shamanic spectrum of personality in some ways. But your understanding, how do you help people recontextualize, create this new narrative around this, so they can begin to find some healing and meaning and be open to your process? And I want to say too, for those who are breath, because I worked with Stan, also Jackie Small in integrative breath work, and then I was certified. I am a certified shamanic breath work practitioner through Linda Starwolf. She was actually on. Our podcast is premiering this month.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea of, I want to say for those out there, I know you would say this too. Your retreat is very different because we're not breathing a group of people, that
No, it's
you are doing
private.
one person. And I think that is critical when we're dealing with this level of trauma and challenge. But using your
Sure.
language you've developed, tell us a little bit more about this overlap of psychosis and spiritual awakening in your
Right.
terminology.
Yeah, I'd love to. And chapter 5 in my book is completely dedicated to this particular subject, and bringing up some of the people you've just mentioned. Basically, when it comes to alternatives to healing than from psychiatry, you've got two camps in a sense.
Yes.
And the one is like the peer support movement, and those people are very familiar with the Soteria clinics and that kind of thing. And Dr. Loren Moser, he was running the APA at one point. He was president of the APA, I think. And he went over in I believe the early 70s or late 60s. He went over to see R.D. Laing's Kingsway project,
Yes.
um, and then said, okay, it's a little bit weird, but I think with a few
Right.
modifications, we can do something here. Okay. So they recognize with Moser and Perry that and R.D. Laing, that the original intention of psychosis is the modification, is the healing of the psyche, that it's intended to be a healing thing. All
Yes.
right. But they didn't barely mention anything about spirituality in that camp.
Yeah.
Okay. It was just like, oh, this is intended to heal you. First break, come to us and we'll support you unmedicated. Right.
Right.
Okay. So there was that group of people, and the people in the peer support movement tend to gravitate to that work. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you might say, is Stan Grof and transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology means going beyond the personal ego, like the personal ego being what Sigmund Freud had developed, like the sort of rational thinking person, that there's a dimension beyond that that you can go to that's actually better, where you start to follow your intuition. And so in the 60s, with the Esalen, what is it? The Esalen Institute in California, I believe that's what it's called. Grof was there with other leading edge psychologists, and they were trying to help people reach these transpersonal states, different non-ordinary states of consciousness, and to enhance and develop their stages of development so they could become more transpersonal, or AKA more spiritual people. Right. But one of the things that happened was, as they're taking people into these very intensive processes, so a wide variety, and they would have shamans come up and they would do psychedelics and all kinds of things were going on at Esalen. Some of these people, they had to take to the psychiatric hospital. Right. And they recognized that, wow, we're taking people into these spiritual processes and they can't integrate it. They're having a hard time. Right. But that's where Grof came up with this idea of the term spiritual emergency. Yeah. It's a spiritual experience, but it goes over to a place where it becomes difficult to integrate, and then people start to act crazy like I did, thinking I was dead or dying. Right. But in his book, The Stormy Search for the Self, he was saying that if people are given the right information and context, they can integrate these processes and come out better, right?
Yes.
So, but here's the problem, is we got this one camp who thinks you can heal everybody, and they don't talk about spirituality. You got this other camp that thinks it's deeply spiritual, but different, largely different from mental illness, and they both can't be right. Right?
Exactly.
What I found in my work in talking to people online was that the vast majority of people, especially people labeled with bipolar disorder, are having spiritual experiences, thinking you're dead, dying, or being reborn, thinking you're the Messiah or Jesus, thinking that you're here to save the world. These kind of ideas. There's about 13 general delusions that are deeply spiritual.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so the bulk of these people people labeled with bipolar disorder are having these spiritual experiences, but they're also having more disturbing experiences as well, often that flip into paranoia.
Yes.
And when you get into paranoia, you're projecting your experience and nothing healing is happening.
Yeah.
See, so if you have a person with a predominantly paranoid profile, they're going to be much more difficult to work with, potentially dangerous to work with, and you may even be harming them. Yeah. See? So in my work in Chapter 5, I talk about the spectrum of people where you've got on one end people in psychosis that are having very disturbing experiences, often because they've had very traumatic lives. And then on the other end, people who tend to be having more blissful experiences, even though it's leading them into delusion, they tend to have had, better quality of life, and then it's just the spectrum with a vast majority of people laying somewhere in the middle. It's easier to heal people or to help people heal when they're at that blissful end of the spectrum, where they've got less trauma, where they've got more maturity, and they're having a more positive experience. It's more difficult when people are at the opposite end, where they lack the maturity, largely due to their trauma, and they're having more disturbing experiences. So before, it was like we had mental illness over here, spiritual emergency over here, and actually over here, but you can't see my arms when they're like that. And now my work has really been the one to say, well, actually, there's a spectrum here from better to worse, and we just need to be objective about that and realize that's the way it is. And that once we know that, we can open up the potential for healing for a lot more people, but also be aware that there will be people who will be better off medicated, and certainly would not want to risk putting a heavy investment into my kind of work, which could be expensive for them, especially when you're on a limited income. So,
wonderful, just amazing. And again, really honoring as a phenomenologist myself, you've been a phenomenologist. You've basically been studying the phenomena and trying to describe it qualitatively as you develop. It was interesting to me when you talked about, your background in advertising is similar to my background as a phenomenological psychologist, which is descriptive qualitative research. So
Mm-hmm.
when you were going around and just trying to find what are the main themes, and just it really, I see your work as phenomenological psychology. I mean, it's really, you just are looking at what's being present to consciousness and describing it and developing the themes that you see. And as a phenomenologist myself, it's been cool to watch your development with that, which is a little different. It's more inductive, going from the particular to the general, where Stan kind of has his BPMs. He's more deductive, going from the general to the specific.
Mm.
And so this inductive reasoning I've watched you kind of develop has been really fascinating, watching your work over almost 20 years now.
Yeah,
So,
but knowing Grof, knowing Grof's work, it started with seeing clients firsthand and what was
oh,
surfacing from them, for
100%.
sure.
And Stormy Search
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
Self, it was a critical book for me too. It's
Okay.
so good.
Yeah.
Um, so, discussing healing trauma through breath work,
Hmm.
that what is it about breath work that facilitates this healing, do you think?
Um, well, it's kind of tricky because the truth is it's really not that much about the breath work. It's almost a misnomer. Um, the thing is, trauma is a part of our life experience that we've not allowed ourselves to feel because it was too overwhelming at the time.
Right.
Perfect example being, for example, a loved one who dies and then someone shows up at the funeral and doesn't shed a tear, and then they just pour themselves into the work and they never deal with it again. That's the profile of a traumatized person. They haven't felt the process of dealing with that loved one. And they might even ask themselves, why didn't I cry at the funeral? They might even be curious themselves. So, but these traumas, they lay in our, what I call a bioenergetic system, chakra system, which I think you're aware of based
Yes.
on your art on your walls. You've got the
Right.
chakra systems right there.
Yes.
And so the what you need to do is you need to help a person heal somatically through the body, and breath work is a great way to do that. The trick with breath work, though, is that breath work, the breathing just opens you up. But there's and in holotropic breath work and variations on holotropic breath work, like what I'm doing, it's based on holotropic principles, but you're just breathing aggressively, but in your own style. So typically, if I'm breathing, I'll be like, like that. I don't use my nose because it's too small to get any good air through. It's just for show, this thing.
You don't have a big
And
Italian nose like me.
I don't have a big nose. I don't get a lot of air, so I use my mouth. And but the thing is that what's healing you is this healing field,
Mm,
and the breathing is what's helping you surrender. In the same way that when you take psychedelics, people make the mistake of thinking that psychedelics are the healing agent. And the worst example, I think, is Mother Ayahuasca. Mother Ayahuasca, the great intelligent ayahuasca. No, ayahuasca is just another chemical, just another
right.
thing. And it's the healing field is basically God itself. It could be aliens. We don't really know what it is exactly, but it's something that's bigger than us, and it's really smart and very compassionate and knows exactly what's going on. So the breathing helps you open up to this healing field. I'll put
Yes.
it that way.
Beautiful. And that, you had many examples of this. I found the same with myself as a breathwork facilitator, shamanic breathwork facilitator, is, as you mentioned, I mean, some people, they drop right in, would barely, they don't even have to breathe. They're like
Right.
right in. And other people, it can take them a lot longer, but how they begin to, in some ways, I like the word because I'm also, been practicing Zen meditation for over 40 years, that ventilating the ego or egoic consciousness with the breath or any ways, because I love too that you talk so much about meditation. Even if you're doing retreats, you have to stay healthy by meditating or doing your own breath work.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's such a beautiful example that I love, I mean, it's, probably sacrilegious to some people, but it's not about the breath as much as the accessing the healing field. So I love that.
Right, right.
So
And
which brings us to surrogate breath work and distance
mm,
healing. And I just,
okay.
again, what I love was that, I'm a pioneer and trailblazer myself. And I can't not go to the next step. And I loved watching your process. And also when you started about the time you were getting certified and talking to Tav, be kind of Tav Sparks when you were, the late Tav Sparks, like being a little nervous about, are they
Yeah.
going to be okay with this surrogate breath work? And then you go from surrogate breath work to distant surrogate breath work. But
Yeah.
take our listeners through surrogate breath work and then, distant surrogate breath work. And
Okay.
yeah, just a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, what happened when I was doing retreats? Early on, I found that I was becoming just exhausted from what appeared to be the amount of energy that I was absorbing while my clients were doing breath work.
Right.
And I would have nightmares, recurring nightmares at night. If my clients were working through fear, my dreams would be full of fear. I had one where I'm walking down a hotel corridor with my wife, and a lion comes and grabs my wife and drags her down the stairs, and
Mm,
I go into a room terrified to call my parents.
mm.
This kind of visceral level of fear. You know,
And trauma,
um,
I mean, kind of
yeah,
traumagenic dreams. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but it got so bad in terms of the amount of energy I was absorbing that I would have to stop the retreats, stop my participation in the retreats on certain days just to clear this energy. And I was clearing it through meditation, but which would take all day. And then eventually I started to think that maybe I should be trying it in a surrogate style where I breathe on behalf of the client, but not in sort of a guru, I'm going to heal you way, but just breathing as if I were breathing for myself, knowing that this healing field has sent me this energy, right? And originally, Grof had used the term the inner healer, and he was very strong about everybody works through their own process in a group. Everybody works with their own inner healer. So for me to be feeling what's actually going on as a healing field, and this healing field is sending information to me from the client, was a breakthrough and also a little bit heretical. And then to actually breathe for the client was a breaking a taboo that not only existed in Grof's work about the client needs to do their own work, but was all through psychology of the patient needs to find the answers themselves. The patient needs to do the work. The therapist doesn't do anything for them. We help them come to their own answers. So this was like, well, this is a bit of a spin-off, what I'm doing. And I got to mention my colleague who was my second client, Monica Kettler,
Yes,
when
Monica.
yeah, when we started working together and she was supporting some clients, and the first one was a guy named Tim Canote in the Netherlands, and we just had sessions with Tim that were knocking both of us on our ass. It was so bad after 4 days of his 10-day retreat, we went to a water park because we couldn't take it anymore. And then when we came back, I said, Moni, how about you breathe with Tim and let's see what happens, and I'll facilitate for both of you. And sure enough, she started working through his process. And then as the work developed, and we kept doing this and kept refining things, and the book is a lot about that. Eventually, I started breathing on behalf of my clients as well. And when they would come to Brazil, for example, the client would breathe first, and then I would breathe after the client. And if they had the funds, I would even hire another facilitator so that I would have enhanced protection so I could go through more powerful processes. So that was the surrogate breath work. Okay. Should I
Yeah.
keep going or do you
Yeah.
want to
No,
jump in?
let's take a moment there because I think that's
Yeah.
such an important piece. And it does, and you hearken to this later in the book, and we'll get into this when we start talking about shamanism, but it's something I bring up a lot with people too, just like Mother Ayahuasca. I mean, traditionally, the shaman journeyed on behalf of the patient.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's
it
true.
was, the patient didn't take the ayahuasca, the shaman did. The
Uh-huh.
patient didn't go on a shamanic journey, the shaman did, and did the soul retrieval or removing the, the possession or whatever might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And And I want to say part of what was really moving to me too, and I haven't talked about this much with people, but it was even as a young psychologist, and I talk about when I was a child, I always felt this larger presence. But what I was in touch with was this field for sure. This field has always kind of existed for me,
Mhm.
and I worked with a lot of trauma folks. I mean, I was a child and adolescent psychologist I worked with over 2,000 cases of child abuse and neglect. I was
Mm.
testified in over 100 cases. I was on the governor's state legislative task force on child abuse. I would have, after a session, Sean gets me a little emotional, I would have to lay down on the couch and my body would spontaneously go into like convulsions, or what I know now as I was releasing.
Right.
I would take it on in my body because I'm such an empath. And I would do this cleansing. And that's when I found out about breath work was so powerful. And even for me, the music and drumming and shamanic work, and I guided vision quests for years. It was about it was like almost that was a natural way in which I would absorb and then release that. And so reading it, but I've not read any contemporary people
Mhm.
in the healing world who have discussed it as clearly as you have, and with kind of the context you have. So when I read it, it was like it was not, it wasn't a jump for me. It was actually a validation of, and I love this phrase, the healing field, which does go beyond. And I understand uh, where Stan and so many of the other psychologists of the century, because part of it is we were, dealing with psychology was kind of trying to get out of the religious place where you gave all the power to the priest, or the Aquarian age is the guru, the shaman, the teacher, all that is inside of you,
Mhm.
and that's an
Mhm.
important part of giving us autonomy. But I think that it also probably we've gone so much in the other direction to not realize and honor that, well, healing though can happen for a pretty clear empath or a healer who can provide these tools. So I love that you were like allowing yourself to, just because you were led to it, you found it was working and it was effective, and not trying to, and if anything, not at all about your ego. It was actually, you were concerned, to say, no, this is, and that, working with Moni, and that it was a real discovery that you were just step by step coming to. And I do think, like, pranic healing and Reiki, a lot of other kind of healing modalities I've done, I work really hard at not taking on stuff, and trying to empower the person to take as much responsibility. But if this field exists, we are swimming in it. And for those of us who tend to be empathic healers, we've got to deal with the fact that that's part of how the healing happens.
Absolutely. And I've met a lot of people doing healing work in the transpersonal community, and almost to a man or to a woman, they would say that, oh, I don't want to take that on. They're almost superstitious about it. Like they
Right,
don't want to take on
right,
negative energy, in
right,
particular demonic energy and
right,
this kind of thing.
right.
And I'm like, but if the healing field is sending it to you, maybe that's how you help this person, you
Absolutely.
know?
Absolutely.
And so I kind of like the term Hellboy. It's like, okay, what's coming today,
That's great.
because I
That's
get a
great.
lot of really nasty stuff. And for me, the nastier, the better, because I that means I'm helping people more if you're
Yeah.
working through something that's really disturbing to you. Although
Yeah.
there's been times it's shaken me. I mean, there was one episode where I called my facilitator over and I told her, I said, look, I want to kill myself right now, you
Uh,
know.
yeah.
And then she said, well, it's good you know your limit,
Yeah.
and then 5 minutes later that was gone.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
I needed to know how tough it could be.
Yeah. No, and that's where I love, I mean, I feel so grateful for my deep practice of, really deep yoga nidra and meditation practices, the image of Buddha under the Bodhi tree, and all of which is similar to Jesus in the desert, the demons coming. I mean, part of it is releasing them. You cannot release them without becoming conscious of them and confronting them,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
not taking them on, but also not necessarily resisting, but allowing that to dissipate. Makes me think of Kali a lot, and by the way,
mm-hmm.
from that standpoint, I really want to, audience out there, listeners, you have to check out Sean's videos. They're really well done, and they really are entertaining as well. I mean, I think you bring your background as a in advertising. You have a visual and kind of poetic or prose way of presenting a lot of this material that's very engaging and has
Thank
helped a
you.
lot.
Thanks.
So moving from surrogate breathwork to distance healing, make another jump.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've, especially with Moni, I went to Europe 5 years in a row and worked with about 5 or 6 retreat clients every year in Europe from 2014. My first trip was 2013 for one client, but then 2014 to 2018, I was there every year. And every year we were tweaking and learning from our mistakes about the retreat process as a whole, but also this surrogate approach. Like,
Yes.
and because things would happen like we think, like Moni and I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is
Sure.
amazing.
Sure.
But then we would have clients who were like, you don't work on my material. I work on my material.
Yeah.
People would get kind of very defensive about the idea of us doing this kind of work for them. They want to do the breath work, not us, this kind of thing. So there were a lot of little things like that.
Well, you even had that one, I'm trying to remember the client where she didn't believe Moni was actually breathing for
Right.
her. She was breathing for herself. And it was
Yeah.
like,
And the client was paying the bill.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That was pretty awkward. But so we kept refining. And then when I decided, okay, I'm done traveling. I want people to come here to Brazil. The routine was like, first the client breathes, then I breathe. If they can afford it, I bring in a facilitator to help me as the surrogate. But it hit me that I'm only helping like about 12 or 15 people a year with this approach, and I'm away from home all the time, and it's tough. And you're with people 24 hours a day. It's a real commitment. It's not
Huge.
something you can do as a full-time 40-hour a week job, right? And I just started to think about another modality called Family Constellation Therapy, which was one where a therapist has a client, and that client has a room full of volunteers to work with, and the client will choose a volunteer to represent themselves, but also choose volunteers to represent everybody in their family: mother, father, sister, maybe the dog, maybe their country, different representations, and they place them in a space in relation to each other. So if the sister was close to the mother, they put them close together. If the brother was far from the father, they put them apart. This kind of thing. And I decided to volunteer for Family Constellation Therapy to see if I felt like I was receiving the souls of these people I was supposed to be representing, and in this sort of healing field, this quantum dimension. So I thought, well, if the healing field is working, is it the same with what I'm experiencing with surrogate breath work than what these people are doing with Family Constellation Therapy? Then maybe I can do this surrogate work at a distance. And after some experimentation, I thought, I think I'm ready, because it was working in the Family Constellation Therapy. I seem to be incarnating, or I'm the avatar for various people, and I'm saying things that are surprising me.
Yes.
And then I started to do that work. And hang on a second, I just need to cough. And so after all of this experience with Family Constellation Therapy, I said, let's go back and try this at a distance with people. And sure enough, very early on, I started to get the same kind of psychic experience with people at a distance that I would have live, And so things would happen. Sometimes it would be physical kind of things. So in one session where the client was a son of somebody who was talking to me, and they were in Amsterdam, in the middle of the session, I start moving my arms like this. I think your audience can see that, right?
Yeah. Very well.
And then afterwards, I said to the client, the father, I said, because the son didn't even know we were doing this work. We tried it once, it freaked him out. I said, does your son have a habit of stroking his forearms from elbow to wrist? And he was a stepfather, and he said, I don't know. Let me check with the mother. And she just said, that's impossible. That
Mm.
was a habit he picked up from his biological father, and I've been trying to break it from him for years.
Wow.
You know, so when I would get that kind of psychic information, I knew the healing field was sending me things, and so that gave me the courage to keep going and moving forward. And I've been doing that distant surrogate breath work for like 4 or 5 since 2019. That's when I started to do it, experiment. And funny enough, I went to launch after testing it for a year. And the moment I went to test it, COVID happened. Everything got shut down. And if it wasn't for the distant surrogate breath work, I would have been out of an income for 3 years,
Bless your
you
heart.
know?
Yeah.
So,
No, I remember getting that email when you started doing it. And by the way, I don't think we've talked about this, but I've been very involved with family constellation work. Have been involved myself with it, and actually have been planning to go. I've worked particularly with Jill Percy out of. She's the wife of Rupert Sheldrake, and
oh,
she also has been one of my Tibetan throat singing teachers. But she does a wonderful work with the family constellation. Bert Hellinger, again, kind of a from
right.
studying within in Africa with some of the tribal cultures, has kind of a shamanic base going
Right.
back 3 generations. And so it was another synchronicity that you
Mm-hmm.
stumbled upon that. So beautiful. And again, only because I want to get to the things, we could probably spend more time there, but I love that. And so let's talk about this healing field. It's really, I've thought about the field, but when you said over and over again healing field, it just started really sitting with me. And I've always felt, like I said, this kind of field, and that particularly as my Zen teacher of close to 45 years just passed away, and he was the one who began teaching me, when I was 18, how to meditate, and that he would always say, consciousness is coextensive with space. That the brain is actually, he was also a psychologist, but that the brain was some kind of receiver filter, that consciousness is primary, not the materialistic paradigm that we live in, and that somehow, and even neuroscientists or physicists will say everything is in this amazing quantum ocean. What's strange is the brain actually takes everything to be separate, and I think that has a lot to do with our language system, which turns everything into things. My Blackfoot teacher would say, Michael, I can speak Blackfoot almost all day and not utter a noun, which is really kind of a cool idea, that it's all process and unfolding, and like
Mm.
Michaeling, listening to Shawning, unfolding this
Oh,
moment,
okay.
right? And
Yeah.
how it's much more present oriented, that kind of is working with the field.
Yeah.
So this new theory getting some play is panpsychism, even in physics, that there is this field. I just finished this book, I think I mentioned to you previously, Waves on an Impossible Sea, that
Mm-hmm.
somehow we are standing waves in this ocean of consciousness. Um, so do you, and I know you're a student of Wilber's as well, but is there any things that, not to take us too far afield, but because I have you here,
I won't get
um,
too trippy.
right, but oh, get as trippy as you want, just as long as
Okay.
we can get to the shamanism part.
All right.
Um, just what is your current understanding of the healing field?
I don't think my current understanding has evolved that much. It's pretty simple. There's this other dimension that we don't really understand that's really intelligent, and the more I follow it, the better it is.
Beautiful.
I just think that, and I think that quantum physics does give us indications that something bigger is going on than the standard Newtonian kind of profile. I don't think that quantum physics will ever give proof that God exists, and I don't think we'll ever have scientific proof of the spiritual dimension. Um, but something's there, and we have ways of just blocking our experience with that. Cognitive dissonance. When you tell people synchronicities, for example, that are absolutely impossible. Like, I'll tell you one. I was in Bali last year in a town called Ubud. Have you ever heard of Ubud,
Yeah, oh,
Bali?
yes, yes.
Okay. Small, 70,000 people, maybe less. Nice place, though. Spiritual hub. my wife in Sao Paulo, Brazil, calls me and says, Sean, I have a friend in Brasilia who has a friend of hers who is going through a spiritual emergency, and she is in Ubud Valley. Do you know anybody who's there? And I'm like, I'm there. I'm in Ubud Valley. And then you think, what an incredible synchronicity, right? This is
Right.
unbelievable. And obviously, this is meant to be, and I'm going to work with this person. No, she wasn't interested.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's great.
Sometimes these synchronicities come just to break you down, like
Oh, totally.
open your
Totally.
ego, man. It's like it's not going to go the way you think. But
No.
to me, that synchronicity is absolutely impossible, you know.
Yeah. And I also find, both from my Jungian work and shamanic work and just listening to and also doing dream work deeply. I'm deeply
Mm.
involved with listening to the dreams and following those. The more I followed these, the more the synchronicities come up, almost like breadcrumbs. It doesn't mean they're going to go the way of your
Yeah.
ego, but they come
Yeah.
up. And I mentioned my new book, which I love to send you the unpublished pre-publication copy. But when I talk about how my teacher, my Blackfoot teacher, we dreamed about each other. And then what he told me that turned out the synchronicities are crazy. And they really got me to a place where it, it was a figure ground shift. It changed finally my paradigm of knowing that
Uh-huh.
the deep interconnectedness and that the mystery was so much deeper and vaster than I ever understood before, or that I would probably ever understand. But it gave me a deep humility and a deep curiosity to be open to this other form of wisdom, this other form of knowing, this, which to me, again, I think intuition gets such a bad rap in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of this work is so intuitive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Mm-hmm.
part of what is so hard for people to understand, and really want to honor your capacity to trust your intuition and follow it, because it's not easy in this world, because most people, Jung actually said this, that the four ways of knowing, sensing with the body, thinking, feeling, and intuition, that we live in a thinking extroverted culture, particularly in the West and the US. And if you're a thinker, you get plenty of money, you get all kinds of positions. A sensor, if you play a football or something, we're going to put you on a hero stand. Feelers don't get anywhere as much. You might be a minister or a therapist, but intuitives, he said this, if intuitives, if your fundamental way of apprehending reality and moving through the world is intuitive, you probably are in danger of getting locked up, or being a homeless. That intuitives have the hardest time, and traditionally in indigenous cultures, or at least in traditional cultures, often was a very wonderful, honored perspective to be an intuitive. One of my other teachers said, if you're intuitive or intuitive feeler, your options are being a healer, an artist, or you'll end up on the streets. It's hard, and that may be overstated, but I just want
Mm-hmm.
to say that you found a way to make a living as an intuitive in a really wonderful way.
I keep a roof over my head somehow.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'll
well,
put it at
it's,
that.
yeah, and you've touched a lot of people. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been the part that I really wanted to get to, and we talked about this, and I really want to honor, because it's a really juicy subject, and I think
Mm-hmm.
you bring such a clarity to it that is important, and that is, and I was glad to see it, because our conversation was many years ago initially, and we kind of were talking about, because my work with indigenous cultures and stuff, and the danger of romanticizing indigenous cultures, and
Mm-hmm.
getting into Wilbur's understanding of spiral dynamics and the different levels and layers. You do a beautiful job of being able to show how, tribal consciousness, if you don't get past a certain point, there can be some real trouble there, or some real duality, and whether it's cannibalism or other kind of things, like saying, wait, but that's not over idealize indigenous culture.
I spend a lot of time in my book on cannibalism. Spoiler alert.
I know, but I find it, and I get the perspective, because I do think right now, and I think partly because we are in such a mess as a culture, in our
Hmm.
relationship to nature, and we can't make any generalizations. I think about indigenous cultures. There were tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of different language systems, different cultures, and all they may have been pockets of certain kinds of awareness, but you also bring up this. Are you familiar with this book, the Shamans Among Us by Michael Polemony?
No, I'm not familiar with that
Okay.
one.
I hope to have him on the podcast, but he makes some similar points. And yet, this you make a distinction between tribal shamanism and these other forms of shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
And what can you tell us? You discuss tribal shamanism, New Age shamanism, and quantum
And
shamanism,
quantum shamanism, yeah.
and which just you got me really. I literally had chill bumps when or my teacher would say truth bumps or a breeze from the other world.
Right.
um, can you give us a thumbnail of what the difference is for you and how you came to those differences?
Okay. Well, I have a background in what I would say New Age shamanism. I used to participate in sun moon dances where we go no food, no water for 3 days. And I'd had, pretty powerful experiences, non ordinary state experiences from that. I've never done any sorts of plant medicine or anything like that. I don't really believe in using chemicals for my spiritual process. So I put that out there. But most people are familiar with what I would call a New Age shamanism. That's what white people are exposed to, Westerners are exposed to. And to a large degree, it borrows from a variety of cultures. It's rarely coming from one culture. It's usually borrowing a little bit of here, a little bit there, and of course, a lot from the American Southwest. Um, and with that, there is an emphasis on personal development, okay? Borrowing from these other cultures. And in that process, there is a veneration of the culture. Like, wow, these are the songs from these people. These are the healing songs, and these are the drums we use. These are the clothes we wear. I mean, I've been to some shamanic dances that have looked like a indigenous fashion show. You know, I mean, which kind of turned me off because I don't really care about cultural appropriation. I think that most of the time when people are borrowing from another culture, it's out of respect most of the time. So I'm not hung up on that. But I thought, wait a second, but like I should be able to have something from my own culture or something that at least feels me like me without pretending to be I'm something else.
Right.
So I would say that there's a lot of borrowing from other cultures. It's a lot of focus on diversity, a lot of focus on personal development, but you've still got the sort of mandated rituals that are there. You got to have the right feather. You got to go into the oka in the right direction. You should be wearing these beads. These are not right. Well, this isn't quite right. You shouldn't be doing this. There's a lot of suggestions about what you shouldn't be doing. So especially being with this sort of postmodern diversity mindset, superstitions can creep in that really don't have a place. Where, oh no, you're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that.
Right.
And that's, I think, the experience of most Westerners. The thing is that when you get to real tribes, people who've had no Western contact, it looks very different. First, their relationship to spirit is very supernatural. They see spirit as more like ghosts, entities that are existing in our three-dimensional reality, and those entities can help us or hurt us. And tribes tend to be very preoccupied with being hurt.
Yes.
So you have things like in the Amazon, you have infanticide of twins because it's believed that twins could only come from animals. So the father of these babies must have been an animal. Right. So they will kill the twins, and they kill them by burying them alive under the ground. Now, why would you bury them alive? It's horrible death. It's so the spirit will not escape the death, the baby, and will not exact revenge on the tribe. So we've got the spirit of the ancestor, or not really, well, it's an ancestor once the baby's dead, and then come back to exact revenge. This aspect of sort of black magic, or the dangers of the supernatural that tribes see, we just completely erase.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and it's not about personal development either.
Right.
It's about winning battles, making it rain, having healthy children. It's about the things in day-to-day life that to a large extent we work for. We work and study. We work and study to make things happen that tribal people would have done their rituals for. And if they get those rituals wrong, they are terrified.
Right.
You know, in Australia, there are certain rituals where they're all male rituals. And if a woman sees those rituals, she's killed.
Right.
You know, and that would happen in New Guinea. That would happen with the Aborigines in Australia. And this isn't judging.
Sure.
All of us come from tribal ancestry.
Yes.
If you're from Europe, you'll find human sacrifice among the ancients. You know, there's those rituals and cannibalism. Even in the 1500s, the Dutch ate their prime minister. You can look that one up. So, you know, these roots are not so far from us Westerners either.
Absolutely.
The way it was.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I always appreciated your kind of a real powerful clarity around that, because it is almost because I've had some of those experiences where the fear was so intense and there was so much it is almost like a spiritual materialism, right? It's so stuck in the duality of good and evil. And Wilbur said a very interesting thing, and this really helped me kind of decide not to work with this one indigenous teacher, because I saw that going on in the community and all of that, and it was just like it was not healthy. And when Wilbur said, most tribal cultures have a word for every bend in the river, but not for the river itself.
Right. Right.
And I just love that, because I actually asked this one teacher, I said, so what is your name for God, the God beyond all the gods and goddesses and demons? And he had to think. He goes, I don't know. He goes, well, maybe the sky god, but we don't talk about him much. And I was like, there was no unifying, capacity to see through that, which is the stepping stone to a non-dual understanding.
Yeah.
And I think in particular doing this kind of work, like you said, when we are working on the behalf of the client or allowing the client to go in to heal paranoia, it's only by being able to see our demons as a projection of our own limited perspective. And otherwise we will get trapped in those same delusional, and I've seen that. I mean, when I worked with, when I was doing child abuse stuff, I was working with satanic cults and helping people get through and deprogram from cults and awful things. And I had moments of getting stuck in all of that. And it is a terrifying thing to get caught in that. So this moves us into quantum shamanism.
Okay.
Tell us about your perspective on that. And how you came to the term, or if you borrowed that term from anyone you'd heard, or
right. Well, and don't forget what in the book, chapter 2, this is where I get into Wilbur. Yeah. I talk a lot about the evolution of consciousness.
Yes.
And I talk about how we evolve with our perspectives, psychologically, as societies, and culturally, how we're evolving. And my belief is that certain ways that we relate to God or the spirit world will develop, depending on how we evolve or where we're out in our evolution. So at tribal consciousness, we're looking at things in a very concrete way, and our spirits are everywhere. And then as we evolve, we become more attached to power gods, which are very similar to superheroes. It's no coincidence we have all these superheroes in the movies. This is what teenagers relate to as a spiritual being. It's for power, right? And then as you evolve, we get monotheism, and you continue, and then there's more of a atheism comes after that, and then diversity after that. Well, who knows who's right and who's wrong is sort of where the postmodern or the new age shamanism comes from. But then you get to a point where you really start to identify with your own spiritual dimension, regardless of what anybody else thinks. You become much more intuitive. And at integral consciousness, stage 7, you start to see your spiritual dimension as just a regular part of everyday life. You don't need to go to Peru like I did. You can find your spirituality in your wonder bedroom apartment, like where I'm at right now. It's with you all the time. You're more. It becomes more tangible for you, whereas other people don't know what you're talking about to a certain degree. Um, and then the stage 8, where you move from following your intuition to having your intuition be to genuinely serve others and to really have your intuitive focus on the collective, is where I think what I would call quantum shamanism comes. And I just coined the term because I do believe that the dimension is quantum, the healing field is quantum, and there we can take all of the amulets and the robes and the music and whatever we've borrowed from other cultures, and we can just drop it. We don't need that special rattle to make things happen. We can just be in touch with our spiritual dimension and work from there. And so I think I wrote in the book, put your sweatpants on, get your yoga mat out, and let's get to work. And I use music, but the music I use doesn't have a religious significance, but it's intended to evoke certain sorts of emotions. And some of those are aggressive, some are emotional, some are more transient. But the music is intended to stir you up. But even that is not even necessary. I was working with a woman today, online, distance work, with no music, and she had a very powerful process,
It's beautiful.
So, yeah,
Beautiful.
and so we're accessing that quantum dimension. And in that way, I think everybody has an empathic side. Everybody has the potential to be a shamanic empath in a way, or quantum shaman. But, some people are Michael Jordan, and then some of us can't dribble a basketball, right? We could all play, but
right.
Some are
We
going to
may
be a
not.
lot better at this than others.
Sure. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's similar to what you talked about with breath work. It's really not about the breath. It's really not about the tools of, or I should say, the like you said, the rattles, the drums, the whatever, and
The breathing
that
technique.
the breathing techniques that if the it's interesting because even though when I have talked to, I've worked with tribal shamans from Australia, my Dig teacher, and then a number of them in Native North America, a shaman in Mexico when I was 18, and then in Africa. What's interesting, each time I've asked each one of them, like, well, what's the most powerful form of protection? Because they've got talismans or other things, and I,
Okay.
for some reason, I always wanted to ask them that question. Well, if all else fails, what is the most powerful? They all said the same thing, which was the most powerful form of healing and protection was a pure heart.
Hmm.
And I thought that's just has stayed with me, which goes along with my Buddhist understanding of this, the heart center, that especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, that there's this, the Vajra is actually this bodhicitta is a spring of within the inmost center of the human heart, which is made of the most wise, most powerful, compassionate energy in the universe, and it's what connects all of us, and it is about this cosmogenic love that goes beyond any particular phenomenal representation of that, which is what, to me, as much as I love all my different flutes, it's the emptiness in the flute that lets it sing, right?
Yeah.
And it's yeah.
And just to clarify one thing too, is that the shamans you're going to meet will probably not be of tribal consciousness. They're mixing with Westerners.
Right.
They can
Absolutely.
read, they can write. Chances are they're more of a new age shaman,
Sure.
and they've modified their cultural practices. Like a guy like Beautiful Painted Arrow, who's super famous,
Yes. Oh, I love him.
and
Joseph Real.
yeah,
Yes. The
he's half
peace chambers.
Spanish.
Yeah.
He was kicked out of his tribe when he wanted to introduce peace chambers to whites.
Yeah.
And he's done wonderful work.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful reminder.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to say also, I have always been pretty old school. My vision quests with my my teacher was just nothing but, no food, no water, and this, reservation up in Canada 32 years ago now.
Okay.
And it was, no plant medicine. And that I've actually, as a psychologist, have had to help people come back from ayahuasca journeys who
Mm,
actually had an engendered psychosis from the plant medicine.
sure.
And so, putting it, I love that you too also, I have the same belief that it's, and I get concerned because I think it's really, dangerous. You end up opening, I always say, don't open up more than you can zip back up, and it can blow out the ego, which we need actually. Ego's not a bad guy, it's a social part of us that actually can modulate these other energies.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that part of your work as well.
Yeah.
Um,
People today are not aware of the risks they're taking.
oh my gosh. Yeah,
If they're aware, I'd be okay with it, but they're not. Yeah.
no, it's walking into a minefield. It's can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
You can have a beautiful experience, but it can go the other way.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this brings me to where we're getting kind of, and thank you. I just so enjoy connecting and
Uh-huh.
conversing, soulversating with you.
Uh-huh.
So the one corrective I want to make to this, I agree with all of that. And actually
Sure.
quantum shaman is kind of where I even think of, I think of myself as a quantum trans-dimensional shaman,
Okay.
going beyond all dimensions, because people say interdimensional. It's like, no, trans-dimensional, because
Okay.
to me, whatever this healing field is actually is both imminent and transcendent
Sure.
to what space-time.
Yeah.
And, and that's to me why it's so powerful and healing, and it is accessing this timeless place. But I do feel, and this is the one corrective I'll make with some of Wilbur's model, is that yes, these particular, like I have the particular healing flute made by, Hawk Littlejohn, who was the only fourth generation flute maker in the U.S. His
Okay.
grandfather's grandfather, and when
Right.
he passed away, this flute has an energy, a magic to it. It
Mm-hmm.
has what I would say soul, so
Okay.
although yes, can I access that place without it? But when I played for my parents on their deathbeds, when I go to hospice and play, I take my Hawk Littlejohn. And I think this particular piece of how is soul for you different than spirit? And is it? Can
Okay.
something be like really infused with something that this particular life, this particular Sean Blackwell embodiment can, when are doing healing work, that you might want this stone or this whatever that may bring that quantum level into this. I always like to say soul is the regional representative of spirit. It's the here of the now.
Yeah, I think, my understanding of soul is pretty close to that, and I agree with Wilbur. I think that they're like spirit following Wilbur, which I kind of agree with, is like it's just like is this pure divine spark that um is really just pure, and we all have it. It's our life driving force, and then the soul is something that we're kind of bring into this world, spiritual, but it's not perfect. It's got issues it needs to work on.
Totally.
With bad habits, you can sort of bring it down. With good habits, you can make it better. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But one thing for my own work, and this particularly came from a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat with S.A. Gwenka, that group, and they
Yes.
were like, do not bring any objects into the meditation because we want you to understand at the end of this 10 days that what you've experienced and what you're feeling is not from any of your objects or amulets or anything like that, but it's from using this technique, which breaks down the ego,
Yes.
you know?
Totally.
And so I'm very zen, stripped down with my approach. I tell people, I say, you can bring in whatever you want. If you get a special stone or a flute, go ahead and bring it all in. It's your culture. But I'm not going to impose my culture on you, except for safety protocols, and you've got to stay on the mattress, and don't hit me. I got some safety precautions, but the cultural aspect, I leave it to people. So I've worked with people, multiple religions, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, atheist. I can work with anybody that way, but they can't always work with me though. because they might think I'm doing the work of the devil.
Right.
And if you see me sometimes, it looks like I'm doing the work of the devil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for the yeah, when you do, for those, whenever I, especially our shamanic breathwork trainings and stuff, I'll tell people, you come in and it looks, for those who don't know, walking into the first time, it can look like an asylum, like a madhouse, especially when you have a whole group of people breathing.
yeah,
But what I love about breathwork in that way is it is, Plato said a beautiful thing, if you go into your madness voluntarily, it won't come out involuntarily. And I,
exactly. Plato
right?
said that.
Yes,
Pretty
yes.
deep.
Yeah,
Okay.
he has some beautiful statements on madness, and that as long as madness is seen as divinely inspired, it will heal. And I think that
Mm.
he, had he was onto a lot,
Mm.
and for sure that healing field. Um, so as we're coming into the end here, there's just, some closing thoughts. And how do you see this work, particularly bipolar awakenings and the healing field, contributing to transforming our understanding of mental health, spirituality, and helping, particularly during this time of tremendous breakdown in culture and nature? Um, what are your hopes for your work, and what are your hopes for this this moving forward and shifting and changing? Like, one way, I never liked the term mental health, or mental illness. I think of it as more care of the soul, or soul health
Uh-huh.
or healing, or or, bringing alignment, or holotropic, which means moving towards wholeness. And people are
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
being fragmented and they need wholeness and healing.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your current thoughts and hopes and aspirations for this work, and your evolving understanding of mental illness and spirituality?
Well, to start, I think that for the most part, vast majority of society doesn't understand anything about what I'm doing. They don't understand that mental illness is rooted in trauma. They
Right.
don't understand that trauma is lodged in our bodies and our chakra system. They don't know they've got a chakra system. They don't know that they can use breath work to heal these things. They don't know there's a quantum dimension. It's just, and that, especially with that, we're intellectually we're quite advanced, but emotionally and spiritually we're still in our infancy. We don't
Amen.
know very much about that
Amen.
aspect.
Yeah.
We spend, there's so much focus in Western culture on productivity, being busy. What are you doing? And healing, which takes time and patience and quiet, is like, what are you talking about? It's just a
Right.
totally different orientation toward life. And what would you heal for, anyways? Because people don't have an understanding that we're preparing, in a sense, for death. There's
Right.
a whole Eastern conceptualization behind my work, too, which is that we're here to spiritually evolve. And if we need to evolve more, guess what? We're going to reincarnate somehow, somewhere,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe not on Earth, maybe somewhere else or sometime. So, I think that healing is something that everybody should be focused on. And right now, almost nobody's focused on it.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I love that. And again, both from a, Buddhist perspective, Zen perspective, many indigenous perspectives, and many mystics throughout different religious contexts, that we are here to learn to die well. One thing I love about
Yeah.
certain native cultures is you develop a death song and a death dance. and
Mm.
and part of the vision quest was, it was considered the, that British anthropologist came up with that term, but the real term for, like, Hembliciape and the Lakota, means the lamentation, or the lament in the wild. And so these ideas that it was the little death, because you were practicing to die consciously, having a conscious
Uh-huh.
death. So when you were ready to die, you had been practicing fasting, you've been practicing with going out of water, without water. So you would enter that state and begin to be ready for that healing field transition. And I don't know if I mentioned, I had a near death experience at 7. And after that, I was like, I've always felt like I was just going to disappear off the planet in a
Oh,
moment.
wow. Okay.
And
Okay.
it was interesting, because after that is when I started, like, even as a kid, I would review my day and said, how have I done anything to harm anyone today? And I was just like, weird things I was
Mm.
doing. So I want to just really honor that being over doing, and healing over just continuing to produce. and it always helps me hear you. You always seem to have just kind of a very grounded way of making comment. Like almost nobody thinks about this. We are in a minority, and although it's changing and maybe shifting, it's still a minority,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you look on the world stage. Um, and that's why, though, the work you're doing, I do think, will stand the test of time, and that you're really following something really heartfelt. And I know it's not been easy, and that you've to put yourself out there so vulnerably. It's just been really powerful to watch your journey, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know what else to say. If this doesn't work out, I might try stand-up comedy. That's that's my backup gig.
Well, or do you do some stand up truly?
No, but in my head I do.
Oh, I just, I'm a laughter yoga teacher, and I do some laughter wellness. And to me, there's that old yogic saying, all there is in heaven is laughing and crying.
Mm.
And it's to me that kind of Buddha, you look at the Dalai Lama and who's it, Desmond Tutu, their lives have been so traumatic, but they always are almost like almost like a chuckle just underneath whatever they're doing. There's a way of the cosmic
Oh yeah.
humor, right? Having that awareness of the cosmic humor to me is critical.
Yeah. I saw the Dalai Lama live once and he was hilarious.
Yeah,
He really was.
very
Yeah.
hysterical. I actually
Yeah.
saw there's a guy, he calls himself a stand-up philosopher, and I
Mm.
thought that was kind of, so that could be a gig. Um,
Yeah. Could be.
But Sean, tell our audience how people can reach you if they want to work with you or find out more about your work, your books, etc.
Sure. You can find everything at bipolarawakenings.com. Okay. And you can look up Bipolar Awakenings on YouTube as well, but just go to bipolarawakenings.com. Gives you access to my books, videos, blog, consultations, the whole bit. And if you want to do a retreat. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sean, a
Mm-hmm,
thousand thank yous for being here and for your work. And I look forward to future Silversations with you.
mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. It's been a lot of fun.
And thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next time on The Other Side. Thank you for tuning in to The Other Side of Things. I have been your host and guide, Dr. Michael DeMaria. You can find out more about my work at michaeldemaria.com. Explore the books, music, and online programs and films. And we'll see you next time on The Other Side.